All right, everyone, welcome to week 9. Today we're going to be talking about enterprise blockchain, and today's Halloween. So today, we're going to give away candy for people who answer questions and trivia questions. So the first one, do you know what today's day represents in terms of blockchain's history? Why is today special other than being Halloween?
10th year anniversary.
Yeah, 10th year anniversary
of the white paper.
Of the white paper. Yeah, there you go. Shit. Sorry about that. All right. Yeah, it's the 10th year anniversary of the Bitcoin white paper. That's pretty exciting. So everything today has built up on that moment, where Bitcoin was introduced to the world. And so up till now, in this course, we've been focusing on the theory and the applications of public blockchains. And so, for example, the Bitcoin and the Ethereum blockchain, you and I can set up a node and we can start mining and contributing to that network. And since this is the case, those systems, they're designed to handle the worst possible case scenario. And so you have crypto economics built in, as we talked about last week, to actually align the interests of individual users and miners with the incentives of the network as a whole. And that's to prevent people from being malicious actors. And however, this actually maximizes by maximizing decentralization and security, you actually reduce the efficiency of the network. So as we can see in the Ethereum network, we have a lot of redundancy, a lot of that, in order to maximize the decentralization and security. And so companies who are looking to adopt blockchain technology, they often don't require the same amount of decentralization and trustlessness because, for example, they might have a few entities that they trust already that they want to participate in the network. And so today we're going to be looking at the current state of these enterprise applications. And so just as a quick trivia question, what are some enterprise blockchains that you guys have heard of? Yeah. Ripple? Yeah. So that's one of the major ones. We're going to talk about that later. Anybody else? Enterprise blockchain applications. Hyperledger. Or that's yeah. They're building. What are they building? If you know the name, we'll talk about that later. Hyperledger Fabric. They have a bunch of others as well. But yeah, that's good. So first off, we're going to talk about the motivations and perspectives behind this. So why are enterprises interested in using blockchains and integrating into their technologies? And so let's just go over a bit of history. So the rise of interest in Bitcoin in the past few years, or in the past 5 years, the rise of interest has led to a rise of interest in private blockchains and permissioned ledgers from banks. And so they saw that, oh, there's public ledger that's immutable, that's trustless. Maybe we can use this in the banking in the banking application, and modify it such that it's not open, it's not trustless, and there's not the same kind of economic incentives built in. And so why is this useful? For example, a lot of banks, they might have to deal with more private kinds of data, for example, social security numbers or financial information of individuals. And you would not want this to be on a public network that anyone can read and anyone can contribute to. Maybe they just want a small subset of people to be able to contribute to the consensus and to the network. And so what this brought on was that a lot of people thought that this was just glorified public key cryptography. You have this central authority that's managing who is able to participate in the network, who is allowed to be part of the consensus. And so a lot of people thought that this is just overly complex and not necessary in terms of sending information between trusted actors. And so there are also benefits. The companies that are involved in this blockchain, they're more compliant. There's still the auditability part of the blockchain that's useful. The parties that are within this block, within the private blockchain or permission ledger, they're able to check each other. And so that's still a benefit of using the permission ledger. So enterprise blockchain use cases, they fall into 3 main categories. The first is solving coordination failures. What this means is that the parties that are involved do not completely trust each other, and blockchains allow for these parties to be held accountable. So in this case, a lot of coordination failures happen because they don't trust each other, and blockchain can be used to solve that problem. The second is horizontal integration. So blockchain is, at its core, an integration technology. And so what this means is that a lot of different companies, or maybe banks in this scenario, would be able to combine data silos into an integrated system. And so this would allow for the immutability of that system, of that network, as well as the auditability. So banks could come to settlements more easily. That's just one use case. And then third, you can create a self-sovereign decentralized network, and this provides new decentralized models for companies to work with, which reduces the possibility for a centralized corruption to happen, or the possibility for centralized corruption. And so there still are issues, like blockchain is not the perfect solution to everything. So think of Bitcoin mining, right? Every node needs to store a copy of the entire ledger, and that's like how many gigabytes now? Like that's only going to continue growing. Every node needs to spend computational power mining the blockchain and solving mining on the blockchain and solving that hash puzzle. And so there's a lot of redundancy built in. Also think of the Ethereum virtual machine. Every single node needs to execute smart contract code. Like literally millions of nodes around the world, they're executing the same thing. That's redundancy built in. So basically what the blockchain does is it takes computation and makes it a lot more inefficient and redundant in order to maximize security and decentralization. And so obviously we can see that blockchain is not applicable for every single use case. It's only for specific use cases called for a blockchain. And so at its core, a blockchain is just a specialized database. And so on one hand, you have centralized databases. And so for those, you trust a centralized entity. And so there's no need to come to consensus. On the other hand, you have distributed databases. And this is where you need to concern trust as well as consensus. And so distributed databases, you could have, for example, a network of trusted databases that all come together to make a big picture of like an overall database. One step below that, which requires less trust between the individual parties, is the distributed ledger. That assumes less trust, and it allows parties who don't fully trust each other to come to consensus using some kind of algorithm. And blockchains are subclass of distributed ledgers, which we'll go over in the next slide, or in the coming slides. And so basically, they are just like a subcategory of distributed ledgers that don't like allow for even less trust between parties. And so one question is, what is the advantage of a centralized database? Like, does anyone have, like, why do companies use centralized databases right now over like distributed databases? Like apps on your phone that, yeah.
They trust themselves.
They trust them. Yeah. Could you like elaborate on that a little bit more?
Oh, right. Well, with a distributed database, they gain like trust over. It's trustless, so they wouldn't have to trust themselves. So they already trust themselves, and that's not really a problem. And in exchange for that, they'd have to make things more efficient. So there's no point really.
Yeah. So you bring up efficiency. Like, what would be the advantage there in terms of a centralized database?
Oh, less energy.
Yeah. So more efficient, right? So you're storing like one copy, or at least like not millions of copies, right? You're storing one copy of the data, so you don't have to like have this much redundancy because everyone is assumed to trust this party that manages all of that. And what is an advantage of a decentralized database? Does anyone have any ideas?
It's fault tolerant.
Fault tolerant? Yeah. So could you explain that a little bit?
So if one machine goes down, you still have distributed
Yeah,
machines.
exactly. So we'll go over that in the next few slides. So for centralized databases, we see that there's one central entity that's handling all the requests and being trusted to manage that. And so this is a simple design that allows for easy interfacing. So like for example, APIs that want to interface with this database, it's easier for like developers to make that happen. It's cost effective. You only have like one database perhaps that's managing things and storing information. And you have low redundancy because you're not storing multiple copies of this information. However, it's also prone, like one of the cons is that it's prone to bottlenecks, and this means that basically like if a bunch of users are like flooding your system, you don't have it distributed, and basically if like one node, if a single node goes down, then like all of your users are left in the dark. And so you can think of it as like a graph where you have like one point and then connected to every single one of your users. If that point like disappears or goes offline, then all your users are screwed. So another con is that you can't write simultaneously from multiple users. And also it exists, again, as a single point of failure. Distributed databases, which are the other side of the spectrum, they're basically a group of nodes that already trust each other. A group of nodes that already trust each other. And they cooperate to maintain a consistent overview of the system. And so this is more fault tolerant because it just like you can handle the load more easily, as was mentioned. However, this introduces increased complexity and adds more points of failure. So either like any of these nodes can be prone to attack, or could introduce a weakness. And so one step below that is the distributed ledger. And so this doesn't assume that the parties themselves trust each other. And the nodes will use a consensus protocol in order to actually make a decision and like come together to form an overall picture of the database. And so basically a subcategory of this, or a specialized version of a distributed ledger, is the blockchain, because it uses a chain of blocks and consensus algorithms such as proof of work, proof of stake, in order to come to consensus between non-trusting or trustless actors. So another question, who can explain the difference between distributed ledgers and distributed databases? Like, why is one more specific than the other? It's like, oh yeah.
Is that like a ledger, a distributed ledger is just like a list, whereas a distributed database can have more different fields?
So both of them store like the same kind of information. Just one, like, you don't have to make a certain assumption. Like, do you know what that is? So it's like a group of nodes that do not fully trust each other. So in a distributed database, you expect all of them to trust each other already. In the distributed ledger, you're coming to consensus with some kind of algorithm. And so blockchains fall under two main categories. The first is the public blockchains, and those are the ones we've been studying in the past. So for example, the top two cryptocurrencies right now, Bitcoin and Ethereum, are all falling under the public blockchain category. And there's also permissioned ledgers, or private blockchains. So there's two categories in here as well. The private blockchains that are handled by one single entity, and there's also consortium blockchains. And these are managed by a group, like a selected group of entities. So for example, Ripple, R3, Hyperledger, they all consist of multiple parties who are participating in the network. And so there's lots of different perspectives when you ask people about enterprise blockchain. It's a very polarizing subject, and some people are like Bitcoin maximalists, and they think that like introducing all this centralization into blockchain or into like enterprise blockchain, that's like counter to what blockchain or Bitcoin was originally intended for. So for example, there's banks who are trying to use this technology, and like banks are like one of the first culprits of what Bitcoin was trying to like get rid of, right? Bitcoin didn't want central authorities such as banks handling your money. They wanted people to like actually own the money and the asset. And so there's a lot of people who think that they're just opposed to enterprise blockchain as a whole. There's other people who say that enterprise blockchain sucks because they prefer more centralized solutions, as we mentioned earlier. There's also other people who say that cryptocurrencies are amazing, and they separate cryptocurrencies from the blockchain. So they think that one is amazing, one's like useless, which is kind of a flawed way to think. And then people who are like more educated or like understand more things conclude that blockchains can be cool, but in particular ways. So they're not like either end of the spectrum, like more in the middle. And so for some misconceptions, the first is that enterprise blockchains are always useful. First of all, like this is not always the case, as I explained earlier. There's always like the dilemma whether to use. Is it really necessary to use a blockchain? When is like a centralized database more efficient and more useful and more practical? Second, blockchains are always more efficient. This is also a misconception. Remember the scalability trilemma. So if you can only basically have two of these. You know what I mean? Like you can only choose two. This is basically that. And so if we're choosing security and decentralization, we can't have the scalability aspect as well. And so you can see that through the redundancy, we're able to maximize these two, but we sacrifice the scalability component. Third and fourth, blockchains are cheap and just build your own blockchain. So for people who think that blockchains are cheap to implement and it's like easy to just bootstrap your own, like that's not the case. Because in many cases you need like a community and a lot of resources dedicated to maintaining the blockchain. Like think of Bitcoin Core, which is a community that's like maintaining the Bitcoin ledger and the Bitcoin network. You need a lot of like resources put into that. And also there's a lot of development frameworks that exist today that work well and have been proven to be successful. So just to wrap up this section, I wanted to talk about the market landscape of what's out there right now. And so this is like the categories here. Like just a disclaimer, the categories here are not like official categories by coin market cap. I just took the data from coin market cap of like the top 100 cryptocurrencies, and I just sort of came up with, I grouped them together in what I thought was reasonable. And so you can see right now, like a large majority is blockchain platforms. Yeah, go ahead.
Why would cryptocurrency and remittance global payment solution be different?
Yeah, so cryptocurrency. So basically, in this case, I was looking at like Dogecoin, like Litecoin, everything that was just for like transfer of value, and not for like. And then remittance solutions, I was thinking of like Ripple, where you like partner with banks, like more geared like specifically for that use case. Of course, there's like a lot of overlap. This is not a perfect pie chart by any means, but I just sort of like wanted to get a big picture of like what's out there. Yeah, so as I was saying, there's a lot of blockchain platforms such as Ethereum, and Tron's also one that's coming up. And like on this side, you see a lot of like starting like innovations. So for example, there's a lot of innovation in IoT right now. I think there's only 2 here, but I think more have entered the space since July. There's also utility tokens, basically like there's such things as like gaming platforms where they want to use like a cryptocurrency or like some kind of token, like in-game currency. Like they're able to like transact, and then that actually like has some like real value. So for example, like think about it this way, like maybe you like complete some quest or like get some like really legendary item in games. Right now, like if you get that, like it doesn't matter, right? You can't really like sell that in your life, or you can, but it's like maybe the value is not really well determined. In this case, you come with like a utility token that people can just transfer like immediately to the value. Like the digital assets become real assets. And so, just as a question, like which of these categories do you think will take off in the future? Actually, first question.
Yeah. Like, how does WoW Gold, like World of Warcraft Gold Farmers, like, why is that not similar to?
Wait, could you explain like what those?
There's an auction process. There were people who would try to make as much gold as possible in WoW, and you could auction that off for real money. Is that an example of this, even though it's centralized and just controlled by Blizzard?
Yeah. So basically, I think that's like the main difference. Because in this case, it would be like, even if the game, like the developers just stopped making the game, you have that item, right? Or actually, that's not the case, because if the developer like community like stops making the game, then it'll have no value, right? No one will want to buy it. So in that case, it is tied to like the company kind of. But it's more like you can just have it in your wallet, and you can like sell it for like a currency. Like it becomes like the in-game currency becomes like transferable to like real currency, I guess. Yeah, because like what you were talking about, like the gold in game, I guess that's still like tied to like nothing real. But when you have something like a digital currency, they can like transact with people and people can like trade. I guess it's like, I don't know, it's more proof that you have it, like it's actually yours. Okay, so again, like the question is like, which of these categories do you guys think will take off in the future? Like, what have you guys heard about? What are you guys excited about? Yeah.
I feel like remittance, global payment solutions, probably going to be adopted in the future.
Yeah.
Similar to that, but with stable coins, like remittances are super expensive right now because you have to go through this huge system to send money from one country to another. You have to pay all these foreign exchange fees. If you get stable coins in every currency, you can have remittance and global payment solutions at a much lower cost.
No. Anyone else? There's definitely like a lot of stuff out there. So now I'm going to talk about a few of the big names in the industry, in the enterprise blockchain industry right now. So the first is Hyperledger, and so this is led by the Linux Foundation, and they focus on big use cases of blockchain, such as such as finance, healthcare, and supply chain. And so they're a consortium of 20 plus companies, like a bunch of startups and research institutions, to advance researching blockchain technologies. through open source like collaborative development. And so what they're trying to do is make it so that any business and any consortium can build their own blockchain or custom blockchain solution and integrate it into their product or company with as little friction as possible. And so this will include they make proof of concepts and they make enterprise blockchain platforms. And so the main product that they build is Hyperledger Fabric. And so what Hyperledger Fabric is it's a permissioned blockchain that allows for confidential transactions between select participants. So for example, I talked about if you want to send healthcare information or legal records or even social security numbers, you don't want everyone in the network to be notified or be able to read those transactions. And so in this permissioned ledger, you're able to select who has read access, who's able to see which transactions. And so we can have a discussion. So are private and permission blockchains really blockchains? Do they really serve a purpose in terms of what's their use case? You guys can talk amongst yourselves. There's no right answer to this. People are still debating. This Medium article after Medium article, people saying oh, this is completely useless. And then some people say it's amazing.
So blockchain is the storage for yes,
I mean, when you feel if you have a bunch of corporations that don't trust each other, especially useful. And when you think of stable coins and how they work, that they're super trackable. And given the amount of corruption issues we have with foreign aid, with the UN, with the World Bank giving money to people who immediately go and send that money to buy real estate in London, Postal Mubarak did in Egypt, a blockchain is still very useful because as soon as that money leaves an account and goes to a real estate account in London, you can be we should probably look into this. Malaysia had $700 million in fireballs. I can see a lot of useful cases where it's permission and you have a central authority, but just the auditability and traceability of it makes it so much more valuable. Still think it's a blockchain, but it's not a decentralized crypto.
I think it definitely is. This is still original, the big
The idea of digital cash doesn't go with the idea of decentralized from the government. The reason cryptos have value and the reason the US dollar has value proof of asset carry. US dollar is a currency because in a world war the US would win. If Russia would dominate the US very clearly, then the ruble would be the world reserve currency.
I think it's still a blockchain, just more practical in some cases. When you look at financial institutions, they don't want to create a public blockchain, they want to try to change
Being theoretical attack, you don't want a 51% attack on the US dollar or the Japanese yen. It's hey, no, we can just shut this down.
Also, I guess the resources we spend on support in my knowledge is so worth what
It's because I feel that argument applies to diamonds and gold, but we don't care about that. Yeah, it's fascinating. The amount of research and mining and transporting and then trading these products. The whole idea is that they're a protection against the US dollar falling. Protection behind all of this is super fascinating. The fact that we're talking dangerous value is really a testament to the idea that there's a lot of people who do not think this is how monetary policy. And there's not much understanding of how the Fed prints money and how the Euro prints money. Having a better understanding of that would add a lot to why Bitcoin has value. it can be a lot worse. So Bitcoin being the world reserve currency would be pretty bad. So if gold was the world reserve currency,
It has never been the purpose of being a reserve currency anyway. Like to be an alternative currency or something. You can't put it as critical because it's just like not secure enough. It's not stable enough.
No, essentially, yeah, nobody will spend it because it's going. Yeah, in deflationary economies, you don't buy anything because things get cheaper over time, and that becomes a very negative impact on the economy. And so it's interesting because cryptocurrencies to me have this huge intersection of computer science and cryptography together, and then economics behind it, monetary policy behind it, which is not even well understood for fiat. A lot of the biggest components of Bitcoin is sound money. I don't think understand how deflation actually works if you wanted to use it as cash, like in the Bitcoin white paper.
Yeah, it's only like
There's no way I'd say what they want. So are permission blockchains useful, or are they useless?
Yes, there are a lot of corruption issues like you talked about where foreign aid is just being, that was given US dollars, has just been stolen or used by like real estate in London. And when that happens, you can immediately see, hey, the Prime Minister of Egypt just sent $20 million to London, maybe we should look into that. Malaysia had $700 million stolen from their infrastructure development fund. If this was on a trackable device, you could immediately say, hey, this is gone, you should look into this.
Yeah. So definitely, like the auditability, the immutability aspects still remain. And so I'd argue that they are. I mean, does anyone else like have like contrasting feelings? Or no, anything?
I think my view on it is permission blockchain or private blockchains are like not really blockchains, but in order for us to reach adoption, we need to solve issues first. And for the time being, I think one of the main concerns that companies have is privacy.
Mhm.
And they're just not comfortable with public blockchains, and they're not comfortable with the scalability that we have right now. And the only way that we can make blockchains usable for companies right now is to
Yeah. Mhm.
So for now, it's okay, but it doesn't really make any sense right now.
I like the counterpoint that,
Yeah, go ahead.
My thing would just be that more so that we need to solve scalability problems first. It's more so that people are kind of adopted too early. We should not push for adoption, push to improve the protocols. And once the protocols are good, then
So you're arguing that like don't do this right now, like just only do research and like don't care about the applications for now.
yeah, it's the scalability. So,
Testing.
yeah, like, because I'm not going to encourage public I don't encourage private ones. It don't make sense yet to fix the underlying problems.
Would you like candy? No? Okay. Okay, so I'd argue that they are. Like again, they serve as like a middle ground between complete trustlessness and also complete trust in one entity. And so you can see that like if let's say parties within themselves like they don't trust each other completely, they're able to like check each other if something does go wrong. So for example, this could be used in like a settlement layer for banks. And so like right now it's like it takes a long time for that to happen. And if they had like some kind of consensus they're able to come to using a blockchain, like that would increase the speed and like validity of that. And so the second big name is consensus. And so they actually have an office like right here in Berkeley. And so Consensus is an incubator that's based around Ethereum applications. And so what they do is they like fund projects. They like have spin-off projects that become like their own companies down the line. So some of them you might have heard of. There's like Ujo Music, Gnosis, MetaMask, Truffle. So I can just explain like what a few of these are. So Ujo Music is a digital rights management platform. So right now, like in copyright infringement, especially of music, is a really big issue, and it's been that way ever since like digital music became like a really big thing. And so what they're trying to do is promote the transparency, fairness, and profitability of the music industry, and for artists. Gnosis, as we talked about in previous lectures, it's a proof of concept and an implementation of a prediction network that can be used for various things, such as betting from sports like to celebrity news. And so that's a prediction market. And so there's also MetaMask, which you might have used on your browser. And so that's identity and transaction management for the browser. So like dApps can use MetaMask and transact with blockchains. And then there's also Truffle, which is more developer-centric, like front-end testing framework for Ethereum, dApps, and smart contracts. And so if you're looking to develop on the Ethereum blockchain, Truffle's a good tool to use. So there's another consortium called the R3CEP. And so this is a consortium of tech companies as well as banks. And so their like flagship product, or their main product they're developing, is Corda, which is basically an enterprise blockchain platform that's specifically designed for banks. And so what they're trying to do, they cite that the good things about having shared ledger is that there's first of all, there's a shared ledger that everyone can see, or that the banks themselves can see. There's fewer transaction discrepancies, and there's also quicker agreements for settlements and details between firms. So if they have a disagreement, they can resolve that quickly. And so some of the benefits are that it's private. It restricts access to data with like an agreement, or like some of the parties involved, they can choose who has viewing privilege. And it can also support multiple consensus mechanisms. And it supports the inclusion of regulatory and supervisor nodes. So not everyone's going to be like a bank. Some people are just going to be like regulatory agencies like looking in. And that also increases transparency. And then we have the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. And so they are a consortium of 150 plus Fortune 500 companies that are trying to pave the way and like set a vision for where Ethereum is heading. And so actually at DevCon this past week, the EEA like released their new specifications for like developing enterprise blockchain solutions. And so they're basically giving a standard like across the world and across like all industries in this space, basically where Ethereum, like the best practices of the industry, as well as where developers should go for like guidance.
What is their vision align with like the Ethereum Foundation or the Ethereum community's vision? Is there a significant difference?
I'm not sure is the Ethereum Foundation like part of this consortium? I'm not sure. But so I read like a few, like I didn't read like the entire like proposals and stuff, but I'm sure that they have a lot of similarities. I'm sure that they definitely, I think they would work together. But I think this is more focused around like enterprise, and Ethereum is just more general, I guess. Yeah. So there's a few other like big names like involved, and the United Nations is actually like looking into blockchain solutions for social good aspects, and we'll talk more about social good later. So for the UN Food Program, there's currently an issue where humanitarian aid efforts, for example, to refugees in Syria or in Jordan, a lot of those food vouchers, like they have the UN has a problem distributing those food vouchers because a lot of the times the like terrorist organizations or bad actors will like hold those vouchers hostage, and basically not the food that is supposed to go to these refugees are instead funding these terrorist organizations because they're able to like sell the food or do whatever they want with it. And so the UN is looking into a cryptocurrency-based voucher system that allows refugees to actually just redeem these meals instead of having the vouchers that are currently like, not working that well. UNICEF is also exploring like currencies, and they're like set up a venture fund that's backing blockchain startups that are looking into like remittances like sending money, like migrants sending money back home, as well as digital identities. So instead of like government issued identities or IDs, you just use something that's like based on like cloud.
What are you targeting to send cryptocurrencies? Do you have any idea?
Oh, I didn't look into that specifically, but I think like companies like Ripple maybe. Yeah. So the IMF is also like a big fan of cryptocurrencies. So Christine Lagarde, who's the head, or the managing director of the IMF, has been a fan since the beginning, and she thinks that like there's a lot of disruption that's possible in the cryptocurrency space, or in the blockchain space as well. And so, as we mentioned in previous lectures, there's actually a few countries that with like unstable governments and unstable currencies where blockchain is a better solution for them and a better form of value transfer. And so one example of this country would be like Venezuela, which has an unstable government. And so they also explore a bunch of use cases, for example, cross-border payments, that we'll talk about more later, as well as central bank digital currencies. And so the World Bank is also involved. They have a blockchain lab, which is basically an incubator where they do experimentation and tests for like applications in terms of like land registries, voting, fighting corruption, these kinds of things that like developing nations could use. And they also explore to improve transparency and streamline the procedures, like they track money that's transferred into their member countries. Also, the Gates Foundation is looking into blockchain development, and so they have a project called Mojaroot, which is basically helping support the underbanked. And so right now, like not everyone is able to like, get a bank account and like transfer, like store their funds or like transfer funds. And so they're looking into cryptocurrency solutions for that, like using mobile phones. And so other institutions that are involved, U.S. State Department, the European Union, and the United States Department of Homeland Security are also like funneling money into research for blockchain technology. And some other major consortia include the IoT Alliance. And so I mentioned like the IoT use case that's increasingly popular these days. So a lot of people are looking into that. There's also the Spanish Banks Consortium, and as well as the Decentralized Identity Foundation. That's looking into like decentralized ID instead of government-issued ID. So on to some use cases in the automobile and mobility industry. Daimler, which is the parent company of Mercedes-Benz, they joined Hyperledger in 2017. And basically they're using like blockchain to basically manage their manufacturing process and their supply chain. And so for example, parts that would go to your cars, they want to be sure that these are like authentic parts and not like fakes or like if there's any problems in the supply chain process, they'll be able to actually like track like specifically like where that happened. And so, for example, their interests include data integrity in-house as well as data sharing, like creating data silos with other car companies. There's also vehicle data sharing. So right now, like AI and like self-driving cars is a really big thing. And so, like the availability of data, of like driving data and sensing data is really important. And so Toyota and Land Rover and Jaguar, they all like have their own initiatives to making this like more accessible to people. So it's not just like Google and Waymo like being able to like, have all the data and then like do whatever they want with it. They want to make like more decentralized data exchange that makes this possible. So some additional use cases. Again, there's like the auto parts supply chain, or keep track of what auto is supposed to manufacture. There's machine-to-machine payments. This is more like a IoT kind of idea, where cars and trucks can like make payments on their own.
Give a round of applause for Dustin. 17-year-old lecturer. Okay. I want to be able to see it though. Where is it? Here it is. Okay. Hopefully this loads. All right, so hi, I'm Charmander, not Gloria. I'm Charmander today. Okay, so when we think about cryptocurrencies and enterprise blockchains, I think the most intuitive leap from a cryptocurrency to an enterprise solution is financial institutions. And when Bitcoin first came out and the idea of using blockchain for enterprise solutions first came out, kind of the first people to go down that we thought of was the banks. But traditionally, banks are very slow moving in innovation. And this makes sense because their top priority should be security as opposed to something like a little bit more efficient or more decentralized. And so we would expect the big banks to kind of not really take it too seriously, or at least be very cautious when they're exploring a blockchain. And we've seen that we've been very pleasantly surprised with the amount of adoption that we've seen. And so the first thing I want to talk about is Ripple, because it's kind of in between banks and cryptocurrencies. It's not a bank in itself. It didn't exist prior to blockchain, but their idea is to involve banks in this new world that includes blockchain. Because Bitcoin originally was like a big middle finger to big banks and big financial institutions. But this kind of said like, hey, you guys have a role too. And they're using blockchain as a way to facilitate international cross-bank payments. And this is important because here's a personal example. I have a lot of relatives in China. And when they try to send money from China or other countries as well to the U.S., it's very, very, very difficult. First of all, the China government limits how much money you can send. It's a very hard cap, and you have to pay fees as well in order to send that money. And so it's very, very difficult for people looking to immigrate to here and buy a house, for example. So it's definitely a roadblock there. So Ripple is looking to change that. So when we say Ripple, just to clarify things, Ripple is a corporation. They're a corporation called Ripple that runs a company, and they develop the technology behind the protocol that the Ripple, the cryptocurrency, uses. So it is also a payment protocol, and it also the XRP cryptocurrency. And so when you invest in XRP, you're actually not investing in Ripple, the company. You're investing in that protocol and the cryptocurrency. The way that Ripple, the company, makes money is off of the appreciation of their tokens. They have a limited amount, and as more people buy them, the market cap gets larger, and they earn money that way. There are transaction fees in the Ripple system, but they're far, far lower than what you would normally experience if you were trying to send money between banks internationally. And there's also the service that they provide that is speed. So it's much faster. It's much less costly in most cases. And it also decreases the risk. So the way that a international bank transfer would work today would be something like someone has an account in both countries and they agree to debit one and credit the other so that money can be withdrawn somewhere else. So you have that accessibility. However, sometimes that's not always the case, and so you would have to route between different banks or whatever it is, and it could take days to happen, and there would be a lot of transaction fees. And so the idea of Ripple is, in a cryptocurrency, you can send one to another person within the cryptocurrency, and it just goes like that. You don't have to go through borders, whatever. The whole idea is to make this better for banks. And so Ripple is actually solving a problem with blockchain without knocking out the banks. So that's interesting as well. They use a federated consensus algorithm. Do we all remember when Brian talked about federated consensus about 2 lectures ago? Does anyone remember, can explain it to me? Federated consensus, come on. Anyone? Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yes.
And so each individually votes on like what their decision, and then the quorums are linked by certain votes that are more.
Yeah. There we go. Okay, that worked. All right, so he's absolutely right. Federated consensus does require a little bit of trust. And so that's fine with Ripple because they very heavily vet the people that are joining their network. It's mostly banks and other people that want to transact with them. And so they can require a certain level of trust, and therefore they're actually only, I think, 20% Byzantine fault tolerance. So what that would mean is, what does 20% Byzantine fault tolerance mean? Yes?
As soon as anyone has more than 20% of the network, they can stop the transactions or give false information.
Yeah, so normally we can accept up to 1/3 of the network being malicious, but in this case it would be up to 20%. Sorry. Okay. All right, so let's move on. Another one is Swift. This is probably a direct competitor to Ripple. And Swift is actually an existing incumbent service that exists. And they're the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. So any kind of routing or communication or transfers that happen between banks usually involve Swift today. And we would expect a company like Swift to get steamrolled by a new company that says, oh, we're using blockchain and we don't need you anymore, and Swift would go bankrupt, right? But we actually call Swift like an incumbent turned innovator because they jumped on blockchain right away and they came up with a successful proof of concept in 2017 involving, I think it was 22 banks, and it was very successful, and so it looks like they might live to see the next era, right, of blockchain. All right. And so when I talk about banks, we kind of had some expectations looking at how banks would react to blockchain technology. And we had some surprises and, mostly pleasant surprises. And so we usually use Goldman Sachs as kind of the example of conservatism, I don't know, and like careful involvement with blockchain. So they do a little bit of research, they join Hyperledger and EEA, and they put their money in it because they have a lot of money and they want to make sure that they're participating and they don't get left behind. However, most of them don't really jump on it. They're very skeptical, and so we usually see that as an example. On the other side of the spectrum, we have a company like JP Morgan, where even though Jamie Dimon is always publicly condemning Bitcoin, like just recently he said Bitcoin was like terrible and not to be trusted, but JP Morgan actually very, very actively participates in the blockchain space. They are also part of a bunch of different consortia, and they spearhead Quorum, which is, I'm going to talk about in the next slide, is an open source research blockchain platform for enterprise solutions forked off of Ethereum. And this is a very massive project that they're undertaking. And so we would definitely be confident in saying that JP Morgan is very heavily invested in blockchain and looking to implement it into their future operations. And so actually a lot of banks, most banks I would say, are at least a little bit involved with blockchain. And so maybe they're scared into it, maybe they're excited by it, we don't know, but we've seen a lot of adoption. And then we have something in the middle, companies like American Express and Bank of America, where when you look up what they've done in the blockchain space, you see that they've filed 50 patents for blockchain-related technologies. And when I see that, I kind of think, like, is that really productive? So one theme that you'll see is a lot of the research projects that various institutions and blockchain companies are a part of are open source research projects. So I would say that fosters, secure, like a lot of innovation, and you can get more secure code that way, and you address a lot of more issues, and you have more heads coming together to make a solution. So I don't know about filing patents. What do you guys think? Do you think that's a good thing? Do you think that's a bad thing? Like, what? I just want to knock on them for a second, basically. So yeah, that's kind of what we see out of banks. Quorum is, like I said, JP Morgan's blockchain project. They're a soft fork of Ethereum, but they added a lot of privacy functionalities, and I think they want to improve on the privacy, scalability, and network capacity of what Ethereum is able to offer. Like I said before when I was sitting there, a lot of what we see today is when companies look at the existing public blockchain platforms in its original form, it's unacceptable to them to be able to be using that for their actual purposes. And so for testing purposes, they have to go with some kind of private network. And so Quorum is designed to have privacy. So they're looking into zero knowledge proofs and obscuring transaction details so that even though you're able to have this transparent immutable ledger, you're using a blockchain because everyone's interested in using a blockchain, you're still able to maintain that privacy. they have like a voting raft-based BFT consensus algorithm instead of using Ethereum's proof of work or proof of work, proof of stake hybrid, just for scalability purposes. And I think they also have a certain level of trust that they have in this private network, and so it's easier to use a less tested or less robust consensus algorithm. Yeah, all right. And then social good projects. I think social good blockchain projects are the most exciting to me. It's what really got me passionate about this subject when I first joined blockchain at Berkeley. When I was first reading about Bitcoin, it was kind of a lot of technical details, and I wasn't really sure why anybody would be interested in reading such things. And then I saw like, oh wow, maybe this can be used to help the world. And so while we're on the subject of financial things, I wanted to make a point that a lot of us, when we see these decentralized cryptocurrencies, it doesn't really apply to us, or we don't really see the value as clearly as other people might do, because we have the privilege of having a very secure banking system. I can always trust that my credit card or the bank that I put a lot of money into is well regulated, is insured, and my money won't go away. And I can swipe my credit card and have my transaction be confirmed within a few seconds. And I can do this at almost any store, anywhere. I can spend, a couple $1,000s more than I have in my bank account, and that's fine. I can borrow money, and that's definitely something that we all take for granted here in the US. But that's not the case in many countries or many other places. So one topic that I want to talk about is financial inclusion. So we have about like 2 billion people in the world who don't have access to banking services. They are unbanked. And we have even more people who are underbanked, who don't have access to the security and opportunities that we have from our banking services. And so there's a lot of financial inclusion projects that exist around blockchain, because even if you don't have access to a bank, it's fairly easy to create a cryptocurrency wallet as long as you have an internet connection. And most people do have that. Yes?
Do you have an idea of what percentage of the unbanked and underbanked have access to their smartphone or internet connection? Because I feel like that's lower than you think.
I don't have a number for you. Very sorry. But you're absolutely right. But I think I did see a statistic somewhere that most people will have access to a smartphone or internet connection. And this has been used in many, many areas. At least it's more accessible than a bank. So sorry I don't have a number for you. I can get back to you on Piazza or something. But yeah. Yeah, so the idea is almost anyone can create a cryptocurrency wallet. So we have companies like Omisego, which is working on decentralized wallets and asset agnostic value exchange. So what they're able to do is, you create a wallet and it's asset agnostic. So the idea is you could put fiat in, you could trade it for crypto, you could trade it for other tokens in the future that represent things like rewards points or loyalty points, or like video game like assets, or even like flight miles or whatever. And this decentralized wallet that you have gives you a lot more access to different places, as long as they accept some kind of currency that is able to be exchanged with Omisego. So that idea is great. I don't know exactly what the status on that project is, but that's just an example. There's also lending platforms that allow you to put crypto assets for collateral. So if you don't have a credit history, which a lot of people don't have, you would be able to obtain some crypto and put that as collateral. I think there's also other ways of doing it, or whatever it is, but things like Salt and Cred, and I think Uphold as well, do that kind of stuff. And the idea is, like, let's say there are, a lot of, I think microloans are very heavily used in charities today, because the whole idea is, like, for me, it's very easy for me to get, a loan of a couple $1,000s. But let's say someone in another country wants to create a market stall, a small business, like a very small business, where they weave baskets and sell them on the street for a certain amount of money. And for them to get the amount of capital to really do that at a certain scale that actually earns them money, they're going to need a little bit of capital to start out with to buy the raw materials. So they'll get a loan of like literally like $100 or like a couple $100s. And that's actually difficult in a lot of places. So there's a lot of non-blockchain projects that do microloans, but there are also blockchain ones as well, where they see that it's actually very easy to do these with blockchain technology. There's also things like WeTrust. So what WeTrust says is we have this concept that we've been using for hundreds of years, maybe even thousands of years, where in a trusted community where we're all interested in helping each other out and we all trust each other, we'll put up money to help out another person in our community. So for example, if all of us in Blockchain at Berkeley each month put aside a little bit of money to help out someone who wanted to make a startup in blockchain or broke their leg and needed help with their medical bills, we would do that for each other, definitely. And we would trust that we would get our money back. And so this kind of trust definitely exists. And so what WeTrust is trying to do is take this and put it on a blockchain, basically. There's a lot of companies that take something and put it on a blockchain. And the idea is you have a reputation-based trust network / community, and you can do insurance and lending circles within this community. So that's very interesting. The whole idea is people having access to more money. And that's a lot more valuable than you would think. And it's not as easy for a lot of people than you would think. There's also one thing that I wanted to mention. The next slide is about identity, but I think Humanique is also financial inclusion projects. Sorry? What? Oh, do I have a question? Do you want candy? Is that what it is? You have a question? Oh, okay. Yeah, so there are a lot of problems with not having credit history and therefore not being able to borrow money, and that's obviously a security risk for banks or lending companies. So the idea is sometimes it's because you don't have a secure form of identity instruments. So I, for example, can easily pull up my social security number or my birth certificate or my passport or whatever. But some people don't have access to that, and so Humanique uses biometric authentication for identity purposes. So that's another way of doing that, where you don't have to carry documents around with you that some people aren't able to do. So you had a question?
Oh yeah. So these all kind of sound really great, and yet how would someone get their money into like a Music Go in the first place? If
Yeah.
They don't have a bank.
Yeah.
Is that the process that people are thinking about?
Exactly. Yeah. So, yeah, definitely. So, in general, I think that most cryptocurrencies and blockchain things in general don't have the final step of like usability, in which they actually create an easy way for you to actually use this thing. So we always say like, oh yeah, you just need an internet connection, right? But there's also that aspect. I don't know particularly for these particular projects, but I 100% agree with you that like that is a huge problem for UI UX in general. Yeah, for sure. Do you want a candy? Okay. Has anyone heard of any other financial inclusion projects? Anyone that they want to bring up? This is definitely not a like comprehensive list. There's so many great projects out there. Yeah.
So CoinText is a really interesting project.
Okay.
It allows people with just SMS phones to use to send crypto between each other.
Yeah.
Which allows people who don't have access to a smartphone yet,
Mm-hmm.
which a lot of Africa and poor people in lower income countries.
Yeah, awesome.
It's all based off Bitcoin Cash, but it's also a centralized repository, so it's not really great. Like you don't have control of their private keys.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. The fact that you wouldn't need a smartphone for that, though. Yeah, that definitely is a bottleneck. Oh, sorry, that was too short. But okay. All right. So the next thing I want to talk about is identity management, so owning your own data. I was talking to one person the other day because he seemed very, very pro-blockchain. And I was wondering, like, what do you envision as the future? And he said, I envision a future where I own all of my data. And when I use social media platforms, when I, use different communication platforms, they can't steal my data. I own my own data. And so there's definitely a lot of blockchain projects around this. So one example would be Civic, which you would put your personal information on a mobile app, and they would encrypt your personal information and not use it, hopefully. And then they can manage the access that other platforms or services have to your personal information. So it would be them managing the authentication, and then all of your personal data would remain within this controlled sphere that you have. And this is also important for not just, keeping people from identity theft or exploiting the fact that they have your data and selling it to other companies for use. That's definitely something that we all care a lot about. There may be data breaches sometimes, like we hear all the time, like, oh, sorry, like someone hacked into our system and now all of your personal information is like compromised. So there's not a lot of trust surrounding that. So that's one use case. Another is, like I said before, people not having access to their identity instruments. So their social security number, their driver's license, their passport. I mean, it sounds like weird to some of us where it's like, wait, what? Like you wouldn't have your passport? But this is a lot more prevalent than you would think. So another use case would be to have another way of managing identity that isn't just through the government. So Uport is another self-sovereign identity blockchain project, and one thing that they are doing is running trials for using the identity service that they provide in government services. So that's pretty interesting. This is what got me interested in blockchain in the first place. So one thing, like I guess a fun fact about me, today when I was buying these candies, I went to Target and I saw that all of them were like Snickers and Hershey's, and there was a lot of chocolate. And I don't eat chocolate because, well, I don't want to contribute to the demand for chocolate from most companies, because most of them actually use cacao beans that are produced in Ivory Coast on plantations where they employ not very ethical labor. So there's child slavery going on. It's one of the many, many, many examples of human trafficking worldwide. And so I chose chocolate as like my protest against human trafficking. And so when I first learned about blockchain in 2016, before there were like a million supply chain use cases out there, my first thought was immutable, transparent transaction history. Seems very intuitive that like, hey, what if we applied this way of tracking Bitcoins to tracking chocolate or tracking blood diamonds or coffee beans or like fishing? Like there's so many use cases of like where we could benefit from knowing the transparent, like I guess, history of where our products actually come from. I mean, I would say most people, or a lot of people today, do care at least a little bit about where their products are coming from and the integrity behind how it was produced and whether or not workers were fairly compensated for it. So, for example, like as a Pokemon, like I'm constantly like my labor is constantly exploited in petty competitions amongst different trainers, and so I would like to be fairly compensated from my trainer whenever I am getting injured for him. And I think there are labor laws surrounding these kinds of things, and so blockchain can really definitely benefit how we think about labor and compensating people. But that's just another thing. So we have this idea of a transparent, immutable ledger containing an unbroken record of product ownership history. So what I envision is one day being able to scan a chocolate bar or a bag of coffee beans or a piece of fish and seeing, hey, like this came from X farm. It was harvested by, XYZ, whatever it is. And I'm able to actually authentically get that information because it went through this transparent, immutable database. Yes?
Why is like the fair trade certification not enough for that? Because that is a centralized source who's constantly authenticating it, whereas if you have it decentralized, like each farmer's like, yeah, we don't use child labor. And
Yeah.
Inputting that data.
Yeah. So okay. Yeah. So this story that I just told you was 2016 me, when I thought blockchain was great and perfect and there were no flaws, and I thought blockchain could solve all these problems. It's not true. But people who are interested in seeing this become a reality, including or not including blockchain, are doing work on this, right? So for example, Provenance is a blockchain company, and they do projects where they test proof of concepts on things like Southeast Asia fishing or single origin coffee, but they also have projects where they test out various hardware, like encrypted barcode or like RFID tags, for example. Or there are companies that are testing out hardware oracles, where there's some kind of secure, trusted execution environment that takes the barcode that it scanned and uploads it securely onto a blockchain. So there's all these kinds of different endpoints that we need to secure. And obviously it's not perfect. And obviously it's not all solvable by blockchain. But this entire area of research, I think, is all tied together. We have the benefit of data integrity that comes from blockchain, right? We can trust that when we input data into a blockchain, it won't be mutated. And regardless of the trust level that we have in this network, that there is no central party that's going to change it. We're getting somewhere with blockchain, right? We don't get all the way there, but if we work on this project as a whole, I think we can get somewhere. So I guess the final thing that I want to say about that is, yes, I understand that blockchain isn't going to solve all these problems, but we're working on it, right? Yeah, so just to list out all the use cases, like fair trade and ethical labor laws, like I envision a day where like all chocolate is fair trade, right? If you go to Whole Foods, they promise you like all their chocolate is fair trade. Sustainable agriculture and aquaculture. So I read this book about like how terrible fishing is for the environment and how even worse like aquaculture, like farming fish, is for the environment. And it was like horrified me. So I stopped eating fish too. I stopped eating beef. Like all this, like I envision a day where I can eat chocolate again. All right? So like we have all that. So counterfeit drug prevention is also a huge thing. It's like $100 billion market of counterfeit drugs. Maybe some of the people in this room have like contributed to that demand of counterfeit drugs. But what I'm saying is you could also have a day where you would ensure that someone who is struggling from cancer is not going to, their treatment is not going to be hindered by the fact that they got sugar pills instead of their proper medicine. Right? And authentication of luxury goods. I honestly think this is like the least appealing one to me, but I honestly see it being like the first to be adopted, is like having these super expensive RFID encrypted trackers in Louis Vuitton bags that tell the super rich person like, yes, this indeed came from Louis Vuitton. If that's where we have to start out, great. But this is also a use case, and maybe we'll start out there, but eventually I want to get to all of these points on the list. So cool. That's just my like little speech right there. All right, so the next interesting thing that I want to talk about is energy. So it's also a social good concern, of course, how sustainable our energy is. If you're not already aware of that, please read a little bit about energy sources and sustainable energy. So one small example would be a microgrid. So there are companies that will allow normal people like you and me who have, some kind of house that we own and a rooftop to set up rooftop solar panels, and they're connected with some kind of blockchain ledger that records transactions, and you would actually be able to generate energy using your solar panel and actually sell it back to the energy company or sell it to one of your neighbors, or you could use it yourself. And the cool thing would also be, of course, that if there's a natural disaster that happens and your power supply gets cut off, maybe you can help supply you and your neighbors with electricity. And that would be really cool. So blockchain technology is one way of helping that happen. It's in general good for IoT and being able to transact between devices that aren't really controlled by people. Another one that Kate mentioned to me is, I think, Electron. And the idea would be all big players or even small players in the energy industry would put their power sources and things that generate energy and consume energy on a blockchain so that they're able to, or some kind of distributed database where they're all able to share data with each other about the supply that they're able to generate in the location that they are and the demand that they're expecting from different places that use energy. And with that, they're able to gauge, how to properly distribute that energy and what would be the most efficient way to do that. Is that a correct way to say it? Okay. All right. So that would be a more bigger example. But of course, one thing I want to talk about that I've seen as a big theme in blockchain technology and adoption is a lot of things only work if everybody does it. And this is one of those examples. Same with supply chain, same with big banks using some kind of international payment system. It works if everybody uses it. And you have to reach a certain threshold before it actually becomes useful. So everyone needs to join, and then it starts becoming more and more useful as you have even smaller things participating. So you could have all of the major energy companies participating in managing the supply of what they're providing for all of their users. And then you could have things like electric cars, for example, also contributing their data to this blockchain. And you can get more and more optimized in how you distribute your energy. So that's a really cool looking into the future thing that we can enable with blockchain. There's also Switch, which is completely separate from all of this, but they award tokens. Their idea is to tokenize this concept of sustainable energy and being a good citizen in the way that you use energy. So I think what they're starting with is rewarding organizations that produce renewable energy with tokens, and then in the future adding users into that and rewarding people with tokens when they use less energy, and presumably this token would have some kind of value. Yes?
What type of mining do they use?
Mining?
Do they use like proof of work?
I didn't look into how they actually implement this,
Yeah.
just because I didn't think it would be that interesting. Sometimes a lot of these things are built on top of things like Ethereum, so they would harness Ethereum's consensus capabilities. Yeah, but obviously most of these projects are very light workload, so they're not being used like constantly all the time, and so Ethereum is able to handle it. But if we have like all these things that we want to happen, we need to solve scalability issues. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. Do you want a candy for asking? Okay. Yeah. So does anyone else have any other energy projects that they've heard about? I know Kate knows a lot about this. I just like it, regardless of candy, like.
So I think another interesting use case in this space is like, so the kind of big vision that Gloria's describing, I think is where we're going to be in like kind of 15, 20 years. I think the more immediate use case of blockchain energy that is being implemented at the moment is like the kind of renewable energy credits or kind of low carbon fuel standard credit tracking. So green credits and trading attributes in terms of like how blockchain is used. It's literally like creation and trade, so it's very basic, but it gets all these big companies understanding what blockchain is and how it could work in that system, because exactly as Gloria said, unless we reach that tipping point and they're all on the same page, it's not really going to work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a really great effort is to educate everyone about blockchain. Because when the internet first came out, people were like, what is this, right? All new technologies have some kind of scary element to them that people find unwilling, or people are unwilling to accept. And so blockchain is obviously falling under that category, and the more people we educate about blockchain, the better. Okay. Do you want a candy, by the way?
I've had to.
Okay. All right. So I also want to talk about the environment. So carbon credits is kind of a good segue from the last slide. So carbon credits, if you don't know, is the prevention of one carbon credit is the prevention of 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide being released into the atmosphere. So sorry, is that inaccurate or?
I think it allows you to release 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and that you have to have these carbon
Right.
cap and trace statements.
Oh, you have to have them?
And
Oh.
so that companies that reduce their pollution and have had carbon credits can sell them to other companies that want to pollute it.
Mm-hmm. I guess, but what I was trying to say, yeah, is that 1 credit represents the prevention of 1. And so one way that you would use it is if you're going to emit 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide, you'd want to buy a carbon credit to offset this negative impact that you have on the environment. So it's kind of like, oh, you can buy your way to just, erase what you've done, which, it's fair. So basically, a lot of companies nowadays, they're known for polluting the air a lot. And so what they do is they buy a lot of carbon credits. So they pay for basically another company to plant trees or do some kind of effort that reduces carbon dioxide being produced into the air. Yes.
Who's selling and managing all the carbon credits?
I actually don't know. I would presume that. Oh.
Different governments. So I think you're talking about carbon offsets, and that's you buy, people plant trees or other.
Oh, okay.
Carbon.
Okay.
Carbon credits are like a cap and trade system, like in Europe, and the government will set up essentially. There's been different. Yeah, the European regulatory body will release carbon credits. But a lot of times, if you've been a big polluter, they just give you a ton, and so the carbon credits in the first iteration of the European version went to zero because way too many carbon credits were given away for free. There was no real incentive. There was just very cheap.
Yeah, I haven't done a lot of research on this, but I guess the main idea that I'm trying to forward is the idea of offsetting the carbon that you emit by contributing to the prevention of carbon being emitted. So carbon credits can very easily be represented as tokens. Tokens can mean anything, and a carbon credit is a very good unit of measurement that you could represent as one token. So the idea of using a blockchain in this case is it would make it so that it's easily tradable. There's increased integrity in information, and you'd be able to measure exactly where these carbon credits are going, maybe actually get information about the impact that they're having and where they're being produced and who is using them, et cetera, et cetera. And so I've seen a lot of various projects that are using Viridium to do some kind of carbon credit reward system or trading system or some kind of platform where you get rewarded with carbon credits or you spend carbon credits or you buy carbon credits, whatever it is, you're doing some kind of token activity with it. So if Viridium's in all of these platforms, they're doing something right. So if you want to check them out, that'd be cool. So that's carbon credits. And then I found this random project somewhere called Recycle to Coin, where they basically have different stations around the world where if you bring recycled goods there and you recycle with them, they will reward you with cryptocurrency. So they have BCDC tokens where after like a month or so, you can redeem them for Ether or Bitcoin, which I think is great. I think they're like... they're doing something good for us here. But the whole idea is incentivizing people to recycle. If this can be like a whole other thing where we all have like smart trash cans and like all these trash cans get rewarded based on how many like recyclable items they eat, you know, the more bottles you shove into this trash can, the more crypto you get. Like that would be great. Obviously, like everyone needs to participate for that to happen. But if you want to think about this like beautiful ideal world where crypto runs everything and everyone's a perfect citizen, you know, it's a good vision. Yes.
Where does Recycle to Coin get their money from?
They probably get donations. It's one of those like, that's why I said like they must be doing something like, this is like a purely for social good kind of thing. Yeah, like it's kind of like if I was really rich and I really cared about recycling and I just said like, oh, I'm gonna set up these recycling centers and I'll give you cash if you give me like recyclables, you know, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Like, does carbon credits really have such a bad consistency issue that like blockchain isn't necessary? Like, what's to say that like anything that has common incentive can be turned into blockchain? There has to be some restriction.
Yeah, again, I haven't done extensive research on carbon credits in particular, but the whole idea is with blockchain, you have data integrity. And you have data integrity without needing to trust everyone in the system. So however that translates to your particular use case, if it creates value, like, sure, you know, use a blockchain. Not to say that that's how you should think about blockchain, but, you know, that's, I think, the value that they're trying to add with a blockchain. Yeah. Do you want a candy? Okay. Does anyone want candy? I have a lot. You want candy? Okay. Anyone else? All right. Okay. Cool. It says that there are 69 servings, so I think we've gotten rid of maybe 30. Yeah, okay. Anyone have any other environmental projects Or like an idea that just came to mind. Pitch your startup. Yeah.
Changing Bitcoin to proof of stake.
Changing Bitcoin to proof of stake. That would definitely help the environment. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Follow up on the trade aspect.
Mm-hmm.
We talked a lot about the idea of like an oracle, like getting a physical product
Mm-hmm.
on the chain. But one of the use cases for a lot of certifications is that you spend a ton of resources just verifying transactions. And it's the equivalent of asking two different parties how much they paid for a given product,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to verify those transactions.
Yeah.
It'd be a huge advantage to fair trade to reinforce the lines
Right.
to any other certification to have this common ledger,
Yeah.
independent of proving the physical product was tied to it.
Yeah.
Because that process already takes place through third party audit.
Yeah. I think in general it would decentralize the whole process of certifying a fair trade product, because right now you have like Fair Trade USA or Organic USA like going in and auditing these particular farms and presumably, being able to see everything and making sure that it's true. But you would never know because it's a centralized agency. So yeah, you have a question?
This is like tangentially environmental, but you could apply blockchain to voting.
Yeah.
So in areas where voting is like sketchy or like voter suppression occurs or voter booths aren't like regulated, if votes go on the blockchain, then you can analyze that and have a like fair, safe election.
Yeah. I didn't include a voting slide, but it definitely came to mind. I thought like identity might fall under that. Yeah, but that's definitely a good use case. Yeah, but I think in general, another thing that I found, another theme that I've seen with blockchain is in order for blockchain, I stole this from David Chom, but he made a speech where he said, in order for blockchain to reach mass adoption, it needs to exceed what consumers are already getting from their traditional platforms. So in banking, it would mean you have even faster transactions or you have even more access to money or whatever. And blockchain is like none of those things right now. And so something like voting, for example, you would need people to trust the blockchain system more than they trust their own government. And in some cases, maybe that's easy to do, but that would be a big barrier in the US, where I think, I don't know, like most of us, I think, would generally trust the system of balloting that we have right now. And so for something to be truly secure and trustworthy on a blockchain platform is going to take a lot more work than what we have right now. Yeah, Dave?
Just to echo on that, like, there's lots of hard cryptography problems in the governance situation or voting situation as well. It's like you want to be able to resist being able to sell your votes, and we essentially have a nil result based saying that you need a SGX or trust execution environment at some point in the process for it to work.
Okay.
Which is very
yeah. So there's a lot of, I guess, bottlenecks, things like trusted hardware needing to exist.
Is also very non-trivial.
Yeah. Daniel?
Yeah, another big problem with I've been doing research on it, and another big problem is getting an accurate vote from your voting device, whatever it is, to the blockchain. There's still that problem of making sure that the data is actually legitimate, and that
exactly.
Will be a problem regardless of whether you're using blockchain.
Yeah. Data integrity is not just the data structure; it's also the input of data. Yeah, definitely. Anyone else have any other comments? I have, I think, a couple more slides. So I'll just go through those. Oh, I think this is the last slide. So in general, we talk about social good. And I'm sure many people in this room will contribute some of their money to some kind of charity or cause that they believe in. But there's also that issue of not being able to trace your donation and be able to tangibly see the impact that your money is actually having. And we've seen a lot of fraudulent charities or cases where our money does not have very much impact on, what we're trying to solve. And so there are charities or there are blockchain projects that are looking to use the traceability and transparency of blockchains in transaction data so that when you donate on this platform, you're able to see exactly where it goes. And so one that I like was Poseidon. And they're also in carbon credits. So they're based on the idea that most socially conscious consumers are very, very crucial to climate change. And very few of us actually control big corporations. So there's way more impact that we as consumers can have than trying to get one person in a big company to change the way that their company runs. And so their idea is having this payment platform where when you spend your Poseidon tokens or whatever it is, every financial transaction that you have has some kind of climate consequence. Maybe you're purchasing a good that created a lot of pollution. Maybe you're purchasing a pound of beef and that wasted or that consumed a certain amount of water and produced a certain amount of methane. And so when you make that financial transaction and that impact on the environment, you should be able to offset it. And so when you pay using whatever this platform uses, you make a micro donation to some kind of forest-based carbon credit generating company. That was very long. But yeah, the idea is consumers have a lot of impact, and so enabling them to put their money where their mouth is and have an impact that way. And of course, it's all controlled through a blockchain, so you would see exactly where your money goes every time you spend it. Another is interesting. I took this off of Consensus's social impact thing. There's this thing called Pinkcoin. It seems as someone who like understands what proof of stake means, it seemed a little bit sketchy. But the idea is you have traceable donations, and when you put in your donation, that donation is used as stake to run proof of stake, and the mining rewards from that stake participating as a validator in the consensus process is also used as donations. And so their advertising video was like, oh, you put in money and that money multiplies and it, goes more towards like your cause or whatever. Like as we've all learned, that isn't necessarily exactly representative of what actually happens, but their idea is pretty interesting. There's also Sella, which is a blockchain payment system, which is kind of more directly related to the idea of traceable donations. And the way they do it is they have projects scoped in smart contracts on this platform, and the smart contract will specify exactly what needs to happen in order for funds to actually be dispersed to this project. And then they have different nodes that are like overseeing the execution of the project and verifying its efficacy and all of that stuff. So it's just, in general, harnessing the transparency of blockchain to make the donation more transparent. So that's kind of the basic idea of using blockchain for traceable donations. Any other comments on blockchain projects, blockchain for social good? I think this is the last slide. Yeah. Yes.
Is there research? Is there something being done to solve this kind of entry into the system? Like that is the biggest I see like issue with supply chain.
Yep.
Trade. Like is there something being done to try and solve that problem?
I think in anyone's research into blockchain and its applications, you'll have this like optimistic time. Like there's an optimistic period that you go through. And then you do a bunch of learning until you get to that point where you realize that is the problem. And I think a lot of people haven't gotten there yet. Most of the people in this room have gotten there. But a lot of people either don't know about it or choose to ignore it because they're like, oh, that's not a blockchain problem. I'm focused on blockchain and, that's not my issue. That being said, I did mention there were a couple research projects being done by like Provenance, for example. There's, what's it called? I can't remember the name of the company, but there is one company that I can't remember the name of that is working on like encrypted information RFID tags. And I think it's called like Ledger or something that is working on hardware oracles that I mentioned. That's what I've seen so far. There's gotta be more research being done on it, but I presume it's a very difficult area of research. Yeah.
Tamper-evident devices are an area of research like before blockchains had any interest.
Yeah.
So it's just a very hard problem, and hackers are good.
Yeah, it's not really a blockchain problem, really. Yeah, it's more of encryption. Yeah. All right. So that's it for today's lecture. We have a couple of readings. I really encourage you guys to find cool articles and post them on Piazza. I'm really, really sad that, I thought Piazza was going to be this vibrant community of people asking questions and engaging with one another and debating, and And I think there's been like 3 questions posted by me. So that's kind of disappointing. So please, 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 if you find any articles, if you just want to shill your own company, go for it on Piazza. I'm never going to say this, okay? Just if you want to advertise something, go on Piazza and we'll talk about it. Just be forewarned that maybe we'll like very critically look at your project, but please post more on Piazza. And that's the attendance link. There's no quiz today, I think. Is there, Oscar? There's no quiz today. So we'll just give you like free credit. Yeah.